Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Well, Patrick, thank you for coming back onto the podcast.
It's a privilege to be here.
Oh, it's a privilege to have you back once
Thank
again
you.
for the third or the fourth visit here.
I think it is the third visit.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. I'm excited to talk about QAnon.
I am too.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one for quite a while. Actually, I kind of wanted to get it in sooner, and then we had some scheduling things, but
Well, we're still in time for the election, so I guess we're in time.
yeah, we're in time to see what's going on. Hopefully get it right a little bit. Influence the voters, right? That's the goal.
You think they have a good choice here?
There's not a great, I don't know, man. It seems like we should have better choices, to be honest with you. It seems like in this country we should have better choices than the two that we have.
I can't be the only guy thinking that.
No, you're not. You're definitely not. But also the thing about like trying to get it a little bit right and influence voters, that's not, people are voting. I just think they're locked in already, you know? I don't think it's going to make much of a difference what anyone really says at this point.
Well, every year we hear about how, the fight is increasingly for a smaller and smaller portion of people, that aren't at the extremes, right? Mm-hmm. They're not, you got maybe 40% of the people on the left and 40% of the people on the right, and then you got 20% of the people who maybe are up for grabs, but maybe are just apathetic or aren't involved or whatever. Or maybe they're like Jesus followers who haven't, decided to cast their loyalty to an earthly political apparatus on either side.
Right. Now, do you say that in terms of Jesus followers shouldn't vote, or do you say that in terms of Jesus followers should be more about reviewing the candidates, whoever they are, really regardless of party, and seeing what they believe and what their decisions will be, and then trying to pick the party that or the candidate that aligns best with the kingdom?
Although I do think that I'm not saying that people shouldn't vote, Christians shouldn't vote. I know there's Christians that say that, and actually I grew up under that kind of teaching. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of Christians on both sides of the aisle who, I think if you would ask them or just observe them, you would see that it looks like their identity in this kingdom, this political system, is probably more important to them than their identity and loyalty to Jesus. Right. And I don't think we really, especially as a product of, let's say, the last 100 years in the West, let's say, and observing all of the beautiful ways that Christianity has helped lift many people out of suffering, ideas that came from Scripture, right, have lifted untold millions of people from suffering, right, and given them more dignity than at any other time in history. And so there's much to be thankful for. We've become unbelievably technologically powerful, and it's really easy sometimes to think, oh, well, I grew up in America here. It looks to me like America is doing a better job at this kind of being a state, if you will, than, pick the bad example that you want to pick, whether you don't have to go back 50 years to the truly hellish examples of Stalin and, Pol Pot and Hitler, et cetera. You don't have to go back to that necessarily and just say, well, America in general, it's a good country. We've done a lot right, but it then is very easily to leap from that and say, oh, well, this must be the outworking of the kingdom of God on earth.
Yes.
Right? It's no, that's not it. Actually, it's really important that we get that right from the start, is going, when Jesus came and said that, he's like, follow me, that wasn't something that was like, follow me and maintain your loyalty to Caesar, right? It was you're loyal to me or you're loyal to Caesar, you choose, right? And I think that many people living in America today, particularly, at least in the circles that I run in and the circles that I grew up in, there's people see the world sometimes through a view that says America is, well, when they read the Bible, they see about the kingdom of Israel, and they read that as America. They think that America is in some sense God's chosen people and the working out of the kingdom on earth, right? And that's not good theology. It's not good practice. It's just not true, right?
Yeah.
And so I think let's call attention to that right away, because I think that error lies at the root of some of what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, interesting. So we want to talk about QAnon, and you're saying getting that piece wrong can inform or should. No, let me rephrase that. Understanding that view of the kingdom of God should inform our thoughts on QAnon and other like pieces of information out there. And we should be careful about jumping maybe too quickly on board, kind of hook, line, and sinker, without sort of sifting it through or vetting it through the proper kingdom lens. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Sure. I mean, as
QAnon?
Jesus followers, we want to see the kingdom brought to earth, right? That's what we do each day, is we seek to make manifest the founder of our faith in our specific daily lives in a way that brings heaven to earth, right? And that's a different view than, say, well, we live, in this way so that we can go be with Jesus when we die, right? It's like, no, I'm bringing heaven to earth on a day-to-day basis by choosing to live a self-sacrificial, faithful life in the way of the Savior, right? So that's, a different view.
And it would seem difficult to then say we are sort of the one that has brought heaven to earth when we're going around the world fighting these wars and doing things undercover that benefit maybe our businesses back at the homeland, and by extension then benefiting our government. And then, I guess the thought process is they're benefiting our people too, but often it sort of stops at the business or the government level and the trickle benefit never really comes down to the American people.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to make that error if you read it through the lens of America is God's chosen people. And so in the great battle of good and evil, that America is on the side of good, unquestioningly, and so anything that we might do across the world, then they would say is justified in some sense because we're the side of good.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting insight, because I feel like that plays out quite a lot more than maybe we're actually conscious of.
Oh yeah.
Because I've picked up on that in me in more recent time. Like, that is more how I thought. It's like good versus, so whatever we do, there must have been a good reason. And I think there's that inner part of us, don't you think, that wants that to be true? Like when you're in America, because this is our homeland, so this is a good example for us. When we do things around the world, when we go start a war, when we, take a drone strike and there goes the house, and there is that deep part of us kind of that just wants that to be done for good, and we just sort of assume that it was until proven otherwise, right?
Yes.
It's not necessarily like it's a balance and let's see if this was good or this was bad. It was, we assume it was good unless it's proven to us that it was bad, and then we need to go with the bad because there's the proof. But otherwise, we assume it's good.
We do, and I think it's a good time to maybe just draw attention to one of the greatest psychological realities that we deal with every day, which is that confirmation bias is so powerful. It's easy for us to think, oh, well, I look at the world like a scientist looks at the world. I look at the facts and I weigh them, and then I decide, good versus bad, and then I, choose the good facts, right? The confirmation bias is so powerful that almost we don't live like that. We don't go about in the world looking for evidence that our view is wrong. It's like we go through our lives day to day looking for evidence that confirms our beliefs, right? And so if we believe that America, or if we've been taught or even have grown up in the kind of context where America is God's people on earth, God's kingdom on earth in some sense, it's really hard to kind of see through the confirmation bias, because you read every headline you read, every news article you read, it's all read through that lens. And, that's such a powerful influence that even scientists who are trained to avoid confirmation bias, they train rigorously for years to become a disciplined scientific thinker, it's like they even are only able to battle confirmation bias in a very narrow subset of what they're studying. Like they might be able to put confirmation bias aside and quiet it to study, let's say the breeding habits of fruit flies or something. It's like a very specific thing that they kind of quiet. They're kind of like, let's look for ways that I'm probably wrong. It's like, well, we probably should do that a lot more than we do. And I think that's part of being a mindful, thoughtful, consumer of information today is it's like, well, there's also a humility in that. It goes, look, I'm probably wrong about a lot, and it's like I need to look for ways that I'm wrong in some sense. And that's a different way of viewing the world. But it's like if what you said earlier of like, well, we look at all this stuff and we just by default think it's good. It's like, well, America did this, America did that, or some portion of our armed forces or some government agency did this, that, or the other thing. It's like, whether you think that's good is probably related to who's in power at the time. If it's your side, again, someone you identify with, someone who's your side, on the right side of the good versus evil, it's like if that person made the decision, it's got to be good.
Yes,
right.
And the confirmation bias plays out. I think it's kind of like it's also sometimes death by a thousand cuts. Something happens globally, and then at the office the next day, it gets brought up, and someone makes a comment that sort of like is derogatory to think that was nothing but good, and you're like, well, yeah, okay, he thinks that was good, so it must be good, and then next thing you know, you're parroting it, and you don't even really look into really what happened, but you heard that it was good, you heard from someone else that's good, now you're saying that it was good, and then everyone kind of gets on the same page with it, and it just kind of self-perpetuates. But here's the thing with the confirmation bias. This would be interesting to get some data on this, because this is a human nature thing. So the confirmation bias is true in 2020, but it was also true in 1920 because it's a human nature thing. But what's interesting about 2020 is now we have the confirmation bias, okay, but now we also have AI. AI tailoring to our needs, keeping us on Facebook longer, keeping us on Instagram longer, pulling up the next YouTube video for us to watch. And it knows. Did you see the Social Dilemma on Netflix?
I haven't watched
documentary.
That yet.
Okay, you'll be interested in that. So the Social Dilemma is, I think it's like an 1.5-hour documentary. It's very well done because it also kind of introduces some, like incorporates some, like a very little bit of like drama, I guess, if you will. Like it has actors that will act out various scenes that it kind of comes in and out of throughout the documentary. So it's almost like it's like 70% documentary, 30% movie.
Docudrama.
Yeah, that's probably exactly what it is. Is that a thing? Is that an actual thing? Docudrama?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, yeah. So, but what it really does a good job portraying is how that we have kind of created this beast, I think somewhat unknowingly. And now we have AI, which is very, very smart, and they have all of our data. So they know text message, they just know, they have everything. And, they probably shouldn't be in our text messages. Whether they are or not is probably a different thing. But anything you do on Facebook, which ties to a lot of things, because you know how many times you log in with, just use your Facebook login for stuff? I try not to, but a lot of times you do. And so it's tied into a lot there on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all this. And obviously it feeds. I mean, we all know this. When YouTube pulls up these suggested videos, and so does Instagram now. It used to be you'd see every feed, and now it's, giving you feeds that it thinks you want to see. Facebook's been doing that for a long time. And you have the power of this computer algorithm behind what you're getting on your phone, and it can first see what you're into, and then it can first give you supporting information around what you're into, and then it kind of feeds you into other like channels or hallways that are basically like getting deeper into this same thing, and next thing you know, you're like this thing's little bitch, I guess, for lack of expression. Like it's got you at that point.
Yeah, you're in there.
So it's not just human confirmation bias. Now we have to be aware of that, and then we also have to be aware of AI and its impact on our information that we get. So same with Google. You remember that one time at the office we said, what would be another what would be another alternative to Cintas protective equipment? And we said that out loud to each other, and you immediately said you started to Google what would be an alternative or something. What would be an alternative? And that's about as far as you got. And then Google proposed for Cintas protective equipment. Like, it was such a specific thing.
Very specific.
Google would never, ever prompt that. Like, no one Googles what's an alternative to Cintas protective equipment. Like, no one. But it proposed that for you because it heard us literally 20 seconds earlier say that. So it's got all this information, and now it's getting very smart, and it can have an impact on our viewpoints and how we're developing our beliefs and our opinions and our information, and then what we're perpetuating. And so we need to be aware of that too.
That whole, like, the dopamine driven social media rabbit hole, like that, combined with our tendency to, succumb to confirmation bias in our thinking, like, that's a lethal combination for disciplined, thoughtful, like, you just can't, like, it's really difficult to have this kind of really disciplined approach to thinking in that context.
It is exactly right. You said it exactly well. It is dangerous, and we are not prepared for it.
Right.
Because we didn't really see this coming. And so our kids are just in it. Like, they're not, this is, I guess, this needs to be a parenting thing. Like, whatever we were taught about critical thinking, we need to double down on that for our kids. I mean, they need to be able to reason things through and not just take what's fed them.
Right. And I mean, again, I don't want this to be like a fear of technology kind of Luddite kind of discussion, but because I don't feel that way at all. But the additional threat of, like, deep fake videos, right? So it's like you can make a video of, somebody can make a video of you. There's plenty of information here on YouTube, right? They could get a video of you and they make it say anything you want to, right? And it's like, well, you do that with a world leader or someone who's pretty influential. Like, there's no limit to the kind of mayhem you could start.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Yeah, because when you see a video, that's a whole different level.
Yeah.
When you see a video of someone saying something, and then the way things go viral now.
My bad.
What do you got there, Andrew?
Is that a deep fake? Oh, yeah.
Yep. When seeing is no longer believing, inside the Pentagon's race against deep fake videos.
CNN got that autoplay video on. It's like, I hate browsing with autoplay videos.
Oh.
Like anyone is saying anything at any point in time.
That might look like President Obama addressing the nation, but it's not.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah, that is crazy. Yeah. So now we got to be aware of all that. I mean, is this a new thing? This deepfake video thing? Is this
it's a fairly
last
new
year or
technology.
two?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Fairly new. Although I saw just in the news the other day there was a fairly, like, deepfakes made the news the other day again, and I can't remember now what it was. But
going back to viewing Americans as essentially, what would you say, that, like, the children of God, basically, right? Or as the new Israel?
Yeah. There's this kind of conflation of Israel, and it, I think that it's really easy to read the Bible that way if you have that that kind of thinking, and then it really can play into your view of what's going to happen in the future too. Like, especially there seems to be a really powerful apocalyptic eschatology that has been really popular in Western churches for the last, say, 60, 80 years, maybe 100 years. And so, like, if you have an apocalyptic view of the end times, and that you think that the rapture is going to happen and there's going to be this, all of that apocalypse, right? It's really easy to just see, America is on the side of good, and it's like that lifts up America's leader as this kind of messianic figure, which that's actually what the people who believe in Q think about Donald Trump. He's the Messiah that's going to save us from these Satan-worshiping cabal of elites that are running the world and the media and academia and our government, right? And so you need a messianic figure to destroy evil and save us from, those people who are sacrificing children and sexually abusing children. That's the story that Q tells, is that this Satan-worshiping cabal, that their primary satanic activity involves child sacrifice and sexual abuse of children.
Yes,
right.
At scale.
Yeah.
There was a pastor in California, a young pastor, probably my age, Gavin Ortland, who tweeted recently that it's safer to basically tamper with the Trinity than it is to tamper with eschatology, which is absurd. It shouldn't be that way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are multiple viewpoints on eschatology, and the truth is, like, we need to all kind of admit no one knows exactly how this is all going to go down. So if we get too entrenched in a particular view, and then you look around and other people are entrenched in it too, and then you can again become a kind of a product of your own environment. I think it's a good example of getting a secondary issue like eschatology elevated to sort of a primary issue.
Yeah, I would just encourage people to view eschatology through the eyes of Christ, or through the lens of Jesus, right? A Jesus-informed eschatology. So, bringing the kingdom to earth, things are getting, the kingdom is growing in strength and influence, and at some point Jesus will come back, and he will set up his reign here on earth, and, will be in the new earth and all of that. It's really hard for me to see how an apocalyptic eschatology aligns with a Jesus-informed eschatology. But again, we could debate that. I know reasonable people can disagree about that. It's difficult for me to see how that could work. But
well, I think it's, again, there's smart, reasonable people that disagree with me here, or that have valid beliefs for why they would believe a more apocalyptic end times. But when you go back and see, again, how some of this got popular and famous and widespread of information, it was with like the Left Behind movies, some of those books and things. And that, 20, 30 years pre that, it wasn't as popular.
Oh, well, the whole rapture, tribulation, like, premillennial eschatological viewpoint, that, you go back maybe 200 years, like, nobody believed it.
That's something.
Right. It's all new, right?
Was that was made popular through Scofield's reference Bible? I think that came out in the, I'm thinking 60s or 70s, although this may not even be anywhere close. Scofield Reference Bible. Here we go. The Scofield Reference Bible is a widely circulated study Bible, edited and annotated, blah, blah, blah.
Early 20th century, it says.
Okay, early 1900s. Okay. Is that the one that basically, out of the Scofield Reference Bible, I'm picturing that was sort of born or reinforced a more dispensational, what's the term?
It did promote dispensationalism.
Okay, yeah. So that, I believe these things sort of tie together, because dispensationalism usually ties in a little bit. These are broad statements, and plenty of people are going to disagree here, but dispensationalism tends to be more popular with a premillennial eschatology.
Right.
And then a more covenantal theology tends to be a little bit more common with an amillennial eschatology, which is a little bit less,
right,
apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I would say, though, that while reasonable people might disagree on eschatology, I think that the idea that you can align a Jesus-centered worldview with this worldview of, I'm just kind of hanging on till I can get out of this hellhole. It's like, why bother polishing the ship, the brass on a sinking ship? Why make things better or whatever, which is exactly the opposite of partnering with
it is.
the divine creator in the renewal of all things and participating in that. Like, it is exactly the opposite, right? And so
it really is. It's not Genesis 2 or 3.
No, it's and so I think let's not just gloss over how critical of what I believe to be an error that viewpoint is, and as I think set up the environment in some sense that we have now, where theories like Q, like it creates the fertile breeding ground for that kind of view to take place.
It does. It does.
I don't think
Because-
you can decouple them.
Yeah, that is interesting. Okay, I hadn't pieced that together quite like that, but it does because, oh man, there was a text thread I was in on this summer that, like there was not even this wasn't even like a joke. It was like, here's some things shaping up for like the end times, and even like, this is a very, very prevalent thing in Western Christianity, it seems, or at least in America. Finding reason to look at the things that are going on globally and here in stateside and coming up with, I guess, reasons why this might be an indication that the end times are about to be upon us.
Well, again,
and
this is
has played out
confirmation bias
for
right?
years. Yeah, it is a
You
confirmation
look at all these
bias.
headlines and you're like, well, Jesus is coming back. We've been, soon, any day now. It's like, and I've read all these books and it says that this is what's going to happen. It's like,
And Russia's going to do this and China's going to do this. And then,
and then all of a sudden you've got the charts on the map and on the wall and you're like mapping and then this and then that. And it's like,
yeah, it's true. And then with stuff that was going on, all the stuff that was going on this summer, like there was earthquakes and there was wildfires and there was tornadoes and there was a pandemic and the country was in upheaval, and it wasn't the first time and it probably won't be the last.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden we're reading ourselves into this kind of story that we have in mind from some of this Left Behind type stuff. And then it seems like, this is what this is all saying. This is what God's trying to tell us. Now, the thing that I've been kind of curious about is I'm kind of curious on what the and is. Like, what is the big takeaway from that way of thinking? You know what I mean? Like, if that's the thought process, if that's what's going on right now, they tend to love to share that. They tend to love to get it out there. It tends to... Well, I don't know if I want to share the demographic I have in mind for those people that are more popular with. It's probably not good, but they tend to love to share it, okay? But my question is, what are you trying to call to action? What's the call to action? Like, what's the takeaway? How is this supposed to benefit us today? All right, so I'm feeling a little fear right now. I'm feeling a little bit of a need to withdraw from some of the plans and goals I had for my life, because that sounds like a waste of time. I am feeling a little bit of us versus them building up now in me right now, because if this is what's happening and this is how it's going to go down and this is what you're saying, the stage that we're at right now, then it seems like a good time to really take sides and nestle in and to kind of build up the sandbags and get ready to go. But that's not what Jesus would have for us. That can't be the takeaway. So what's the takeaway?
You just listed a list of takeaways that are all, I would say, profoundly anti-Jesus' teaching.
Well, they are.
Right.
But
so I think
it seems like it seems like the natural progression, right? I mean,
yeah, and I know that this podcast isn't long enough, or this isn't the context for us to. We didn't gather today to try to take apart, non-victorious eschatologies, which I would describe my end times thinking as victorious. It's like there's a lot of details I don't know, but I know that love wins.
Yeah.
I know that Jesus has won, and I also know that perfect love casts out fear. And so any message that is predicated on fear is not the message of Jesus, definitively, right? And so, starting there, I think, in my mind, if you follow Jesus, you need a victorious eschatology. You need to see your role in participating in the renewal of all things. And I think I don't think there's a call to action with this kind of viewpoint. I think it feels to me, and again, this isn't, I want to be careful how I come across. It's easy for me to come on behind the mic here, and then later I go back and listen, and I was like, oh, I sounded kind of like a prick when I said that. Right. It's like, I realize that thinking is nuanced and all of that, and I'm probably not going to say it very well, but I think in some sense it absolves us of some responsibility, right? And it makes us feel like we're doing something. Take, for example, the very real problem of child abuse, right?
Mhm.
Let's just call it child abuse broadly. And sexual slavery and people being sold into slavery for various reasons, whether that's for productive reasons. I know in some countries, whole families get, enslaved and have to make bricks in a kiln for like generations to pay off some, former debt of some kind or whatever. So I know there's various ways that people are enslaved, but let's just talk about that thing. It's like solving the problem of slavery in America, modern day slavery, is an incredibly complicated problem to solve with a lot of moving parts. And there's not a lot of it that's very glamorous or exciting or rewarding, right? It's like, well, where do you really start? Well, you got it's a multifaceted thing. You got to start, reducing the demand for these kind of things. Well, that happens when people's hearts are changed. Well, how do you, so you got to preach the gospel. Okay, so that's that. And then you've got to make sure that people aren't growing up in vulnerable situations where they might think that running off with this, model promoter photographer guy that they met at the bar, maybe they're not vulnerable to that because they have a powerfully strong family, right? So, well, how do we strengthen and empower families? It's like maybe they have a good relationship with their parents. How do we foster that? It's like, well, that's not exciting and rewarding and easy to, it's not easy to see your progress on those things. And it's like, that feels overwhelming. It's like, how do I fix that? Well, it's a lot easier if I boil it down to a simple, single call to action, which is I have to reelect Donald Trump so that he can solve this for us. Then that's all we have to do. It's just a very simple thing. It's like, all you have to do is be right about this. It's like, surely you're not on the side of the Satanists, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
that's
okay, so come and like, it's a very clear, well, just reelect Donald Trump so that he can fix this. It's like, it kind of absolves us of the responsibility to put the kingdom into shoe leather in a very granular way and in a very challenging way. Like anything that is, big and bad and sad, like problems like we're talking about, it's like fixing it is difficult and complicated and takes a long time. And it's just a lot easier to have a conspiracy theory that, says that Trump's going to fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's talk about that. But before I forget, just this idea of us in America thinking we're God's kind of chosen people. So I'm not aware that there's like a definite sort of strain of theological thought, although it probably does exist, but I don't think it's mainstream. I certainly hope not, where we literally like would state that we feel like America is God's chosen people, right? But I wonder if this is the connection. So there's some people that believe you had the God's children, the children of Israel in the Old Testament, and then some people believe that the Jews are now basically the children of God, right? The Jews are now God's people. And then other people believe that you have the church is now the people of God. And it's not that the church replaced the children of Israel. The church is the children of Israel, And so the people that believe that the Jews are now kind of the people of God or God's children, well, that they wouldn't believe that we are just because we're American. However, maybe our in with it is that America is one of the only countries, or maybe America is one of the front-runner countries that recognizes the Jews, the nation of Israel, over the Middle East, as God's now chosen people, and we're on the front kind of foreground of like being cozy with them and being pro-Israel because of those reasons, and because of that connection with them, we sort of get in on that blessing, I guess. I wonder if that's sort of the unspoken tie in there.
I think so. I think that's a huge part of it, and certainly with the premillennial crowd, that's a huge part of it, right? Because it ties into that whole story, that whole narrative, right?
Yeah.
About the end times and Jerusalem and all that.
Yeah.
So
yep.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's reasonable, smart people that believe that the nation of Israel is now essentially, that is the new children of Israel. But there's some very clear verses that outright say in the New Testament that the church is the people of God.
Yeah,
the church is the
right.
nation of Israel now.
Right.
And I'm just not sure how you sort of get away from that.
I agree. And I also want to point out that you are correct in saying that you wouldn't probably find a lot of people listening to this podcast who would say that they believe that America is the kingdom of God. And I think in their conscious thinking, that's true. They don't necessarily. But I'm a big believer in the idea that belief isn't what you say, it's what you do. What you do is what you actually believe, right? And so it's not clear to me that there's not a kind of religious fervor, in the kind of patriotism that many of us grew up with and are accustomed to seeing. There's religious, semi-religious practices. We stand, put our hands over our heart, and we pledge allegiance. And it was like, well, that's kind of a religious thing in a way. And so it's like, well, how do you act? Do you fear the other? Do you fear those who are different than you, or do you fear those who aren't from here? What place does America hold in the overall hierarchy in your heart, actually? And so it's like, no one's going to sit here and say, oh yeah, I believe that America is the kingdom of God. But it's like, how do they live? That's a different story. I think a lot of people live as if they believe that. And so I would say they actually believe that.
I think that's very good insight. I do agree with it. Okay, so QAnon. What's interesting about QAnon is, and let's just get into it. So I tend to be sort of like, if a government or the people in power, I tend to be questioning of that more naturally. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like I think you're probably a little bit that way too. Like, so there's an aspect to Q which I'd like you to talk us through, but I mean there's an aspect to that where initially I'm going to almost assume that there's some parts that are true before I vet it, because what it's saying is there's people in power that are abusing it basically and doing all kinds of weird stuff, which that's not shocking to me whatsoever.
Right,
okay.
right.
So that's kind of on the one side.
That checks out.
Yeah, that checks out. That usually checks out without fault, to be honest. So I have that kind of that bent on that side. And then I have very good friends who are very into Q, and these are very reasonable, rational, everyday people that I have a general optimism about them as individuals. I generally have an optimism about individuals in general. Like, I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. So like, if Andrew is going to come to me and say, here's what's up with Q, here's why I think it's real and all of this, I'm going to naturally, be like a little bit more open to it, so I guess what I'm saying is I tend to be more optimistic with individuals and more pessimistic with corporations and government.
That's fair.
Yeah. And so I feel like there's sort of this pull with the Q thing where it's like, man, I don't know if I'm quite willing to accept that these people that I'm hearing about Q from are just entirely wrong and they're just completely lost their mind and none of this is true, none of it's right. And I guess I just have to explain it away because they got kind of amped up on Trump,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that can be the answer on there, unless it is. But I mean, I'm skeptical about that being the answer. But then also there's some stuff that just doesn't seem to check out, like Michelle Obama being a man. John F. Kennedy Jr. is actually still alive. He's just been hiding for 22 years. Somehow he knew in 1999 that Trump would be president, which no one knew at that time. Somehow he knew that 20 years later would be the optimal time to return and join a Trump rally. That doesn't make any sense. How would you know that 20 years ago? It's illogical. The earth is not flat, y'all. We've known this for some time. It's freaking round.
Mm-hmm.
You think now we have a private company throwing things into space. There's a freaking Tesla riding around out there. And there's a picture of the Earth. Like, if it was like one time we went to space, we have one satellite out there, could that one picture be doctored? Of course it could be. But now we have governments, we have publicly traded companies, we have private companies. Heck, you can fly high enough in an airplane to sort of get a feel that this bad boy's round.
Right.
So, okay, so then it kind of dips off into the weird part a little bit where with Q, where you sort of get these, I guess what I would consider absurd, other people would disagree with me, where you start to get these sort of absurd beliefs tied in with it. And next thing you just kind of dump it all out. But the truth is there's probably some things in there that are right. So talk us through
I
Q.
think before we get too deep into it, I think we should maybe just bring people up to speed. For people who haven't, heard of Q, maybe like, what is Q? What are we talking about?
Yes, please.
Where did it start and all that? So
that's exactly what I'd like you to do.
Yep. So as far as I can tell, Q got its start in, around the time that Trump was elected. So I think the first two prophecies that Q made were maybe in October. Actually, I don't say maybe, I'm pretty sure on this. Late October of 2017. These prophecies centered around Hillary Clinton was going to be arrested. He said, okay, so Q is, first of all, references Q level clearance in the U.S. government. That is a certain clearance level, security clearance. And this person ostensibly has that level of clearance, this anonymous figure that shares these bits of information that everybody follows, right? So Q has this clearance and is able to tell people kind of what things are going to happen because he's on the inside. So on a message board called 4chan, which is an interesting place for this to start, for this conspiracy to start, a conspiracy that's really kind of focused a lot on the bad guys are people who abuse children. It's like, well, 4chan actually, it's interestingly enough, has been in trouble for distributing child pornography, right? It's kind of a lawless discussion board that, if for anyone who's listening, go check it out if you want. You can go, you don't need a Tor browser to go into the dark web to visit 4chan. You can just go visit 4chan. It's really hard to avoid, the porn and just like nastiness in general. Like it's an anonymous message board. So imagine if Facebook was anonymous, where you didn't know anybody, who anybody was, what they were saying. They just have usernames. And imagine that they had no rules and you could just talk about anything and post anything, right? That's basically 4chan. And it's popular with, I would say predominant audience is younger and male. And so there's a big incel community on 4chan and some of these other sites.
What's incel?
Involuntary celibates. So people, young men who are angry and bitter and resentful at the world because they, through their lens, the world, the feminists have taken over the world, and the reason that they're not getting any dates and the reason that women don't pay any attention to them is because it's somehow the world's fault, right? And so
that's
women
a form of
just
narcissism.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. It's like, it's one of the most destructive ways of thinking that you can, you're not taking personal responsibility. It's like, well, if 5 women don't go out with you, you're the common denominator. You're probably a loser,
It's not the new feminisms in society. What's interesting about that is legitimately a form of narcissism that I didn't know about in the last couple of weeks. So I'm more familiar with the narcissism where I think it's fair to say probably Trump has a little bit of, right? Like that's a good example. A lot of people can, very self-centered, sort of, all about me. And, it has its benefits. One is a drive, like you're incredibly driven, and you don't care too much as long as you're winning. It's all about winning. So you'll do whatever you need to do to win and you get the glory and those types of things. So that's the more, I guess, commonly known form of narcissism. But there's another form of narcissism that I can't think what the technical definition for, but it's more like a closet narcissism, which is, you have 800 followers on Instagram and you're living in your mom's basement, but it's because you haven't been discovered. It's because the world doesn't see you for how great you are. Mm-hmm. If they saw you for how great you are, you'd have 1 million followers on Instagram, not 800. And if you would just have your inner talents and your inner awesome be recognized by others, because it's there.
Right.
And the problem is other people aren't seeing it. If they could see it, then you would be who you truly are, which would be super successful and in charge and leading the pack and out there getting the glory. But the problem is other people don't see it. And so I guess I did not know that was a form of narcissism, because it tends to be just, they're not out there.
Kind of
it's
a
closet
narcissism.
So what you're saying about the celibate thing, what was the slang for that?
The incels, they tend to be very hateful online. They tend to go, like, they'll find targets, they troll people and, like, just try to make them feel terrible. And it's the same view of the world that a lot of, let me be more careful with how I say this. It's the kinds of places where that view is predominant, or at least welcomed, is also the kind of place from which school shooters and those kind of people come out of. In fact, 4chan has there's a site similar to 4chan called 8chan. I think it's now called 8kun. It had to reinvent itself because it got in trouble because one of the more recent mass shooters, I think the El Paso Walmart mass shooter, posted his diatribe on 8chan before going and killing all those people. So that's the kind of seedy underbelly of the web that 4chan and 8chan, 8kun. And I'm going to throw Reddit in there too, although Reddit has done a good job of kind of cleaning up its act. And it's always difficult to know where to draw the line between what kind of speech to allow and what not when you're a webmaster like that. But
yeah, it has to be.
Reddit used to be that, like, totally the seedy underbelly. It's like I kind of pictured a bunch of, 27-year-old men in their mom's basement wearing their, nylon basketball shorts and playing video games and bitter at the world that it hasn't laid itself out for them the way that they want it to.
Yeah.
It's like, that's kind of what you get on those discussion boards. Right?
Yes.
Like, for largely.
Yep. So. Okay. So you have 4chan, which is it could be a great place to drop these Q drops because it is anonymous and it's kind of the Wild West and there's all kinds of crazy on there. So it could go either way, right? It could be a very smart strategic place, or it could be just, here's some more crazy on 4chan, and this one happened to pop.
Yeah. I much prefer if you have some secret info to get out. Like, I like what Ed Snowden did with Glenn Greenwald.
Glenn Greenwald.
Yeah. With the, he
That's
got him the info, right?
Okay, that's a good point.
And I don't see Q doing that with anyone that, that I've seen. It's like there's no credible journalistic source that Q has built a relationship with that I'm aware of.
True. It might be because they don't think there are any, or they don't want the message to go through any one person or any one organization. They're just going to go them to the world.
That is one of the pillars of Q thinking, is that, the media is controlled by this satanic cabal. So they, and it's really easy to just explain. Whenever any evidence is offered against Q, it's like, well, that's just Satan, right? Making you think that. It's like, well, that's just the satanic media, that makes you think that. And that actually is tearing apart families too, because when somebody goes down that path and then someone else in their family is like, hey, you're kind of in the twilight zone, like, oh, well, it's just Satan making you think that, and it's like, yes, that's not great.
It is causing problems in families.
Yeah.
All right.
But going back to, okay, so
someone has Q clearance.
Someone's
Q clearance
on 4chan. Ostensibly, they started writing on 4chan. And the initial prophecies, if you will, said that Hillary Clinton was just about to be arrested. There was a date for that. I think it was October 30th, 2017. And then there was something like 25,000 indictments that were going to be unsealed, and vast members of this global cabal were going to be arrested and either executed or imprisoned for their crimes against children. And these would all, these would be people that we know, entertainment people in government, entertainment and media, et cetera. And then shortly thereafter, obviously that didn't happen, right? Hillary Clinton didn't get arrested. None of those 25,000 indictments ever, none of that happened. Shortly thereafter, I think there was a prophecy about John Podesta, who was on Hillary Clinton's election campaign. He was going to be arrested, and there was some more, prophecies around that too. This was all supposedly inside information that he was sharing, and et cetera. So none of that happened. So you might wonder, how should a Christian view a prophet whose prophecies don't come true, right? And Scripture actually tells us how to do that, what to do with that. It's like to test the spirits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a false prophet, well, if there's a prophecy that doesn't come true, then you have a false prophet, right?
Yeah.
And so I would argue that from the get-go, this has been on shaky ground.
That's interesting, because the one thing that keeps popping up, I would say, from what I can recall at this point, the most popular element to Q is Hillary Clinton's going to be arrested and tried.
Mm-hmm.
Bill too, maybe. The Clintons, but Hillary specifically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a whole lot more than that, which you'll get into, but that one seems to pop up a lot. Like, I'm even thinking of when I've had questions or they've texted back about Q or that type of thing. Like the thing of Hillary likely being arrested in the coming months, that seems to be one of the most popular things with Q. Are you saying that it was basically the original thing?
Yep, I think that was the first Q drop, if you will, in October of 2017. Pretty sure.
Can we verify that, Andrew? Do you have something here?
Mm-hmm.
This is an article on TGC.
Mm-hmm.
Started on October 28, 2017.
Mm-hmm. Person identifying themselves as Q Clearance Patriot, as Patrick alluded to. The first message said that Hillary Rodham Clinton extradition already in motion, effective yesterday with several countries in case of cross-border run. Passport approved to be flagged effective October 30th at 12:01 a.m. Expect massive riots organized in defiance and others fleeing the U.S. to occur. United States EMS will conduct the operation while National Guard activated. Proof check. Locate a National Guard member and ask if activated for duty on October 30th across most major cities. So that was the first post on October 28th.
Okay, and then the second one's a little bit more extensive, so we won't read through that. But
but it says things. Some of the highlights of that one is this is not an RVD, Republican versus Democrat battle. Why did George Soros, donate all of his money recently? Why would he place all his funds in an RC? And then something about mockingbirds, and then the date of October 30th. God bless fellow patriots.
Okay, now let's look at, here's another one on November 1, 2017.
This one references Podesta specifically.
Oh, I see. Okay. But I'm just looking at the timeline because he says, over the course of the next several days, you will undoubtedly realize we are taking back our great country, the land of the free, from the evil tyrants that wish to do us harm and destroy the last remaining refuge of shining lights. On POTUS's order, we have initiated certain fail-safes that shall safeguard the public from the primary fallout, which is slated to occur 11/3 upon the arrest announcement of Mr. Podesta. Did that ever happen?
No.
Mr. Podesta was never arrested?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of.
And
either.
Hillary Clinton was never arrested.
Right.
And this was November of 2017. And this is the main thing that Q started on.
This November 1st message you're looking at now actually was written after the earlier prophecies were demonstrably false, right? Because they had given dates and times in the prior message, and then it didn't happen.
So then we go back to the drawing board and come up with a different prediction. Now, let me ask this at this point. You were going to say something.
I was just going to say, since then, Q drops have become more general, more vague.
They have.
Right.
Yes.
So not so many specific dates and times.
Smart.
Which in some ways is more difficult because, well, it's like, if you're looking at the world through that lens and then you see headlines, and it's like, you just fit those headlines into that lens.
That's right.
It just fits the narratives, and it just back to the confirmation bias. It just confirms what you were already thinking.
Yes. Now, let me ask this at this point. So this is October the 20th of 2020. This was October and November of 2017. So here we are, pretty much exactly 3 years later. This hasn't come true, but Q has only gained steam. So what are the hardcore Q people What would they say about that? Oops, you just had it wrong that one time. Oops, you had it wrong a second time with the P guy.
Podesta. Yeah.
But everything since then, he's been good because he's been vague and it's probably going to happen. It just hasn't happened yet. Is that what they would say? What would they say to defend that?
It's really easy to defend, actually, because another core element of the Q belief system is that, the deep state exists and is there to fight Donald on all these things, and that's part of what the structure that hides the evil and protects the evildoers, right? So there's an unelected, and you can't really argue with the deep state in that, they say, well, there's an unelected bunch of bureaucrats and regulators that basically run the country, and they're not accountable to the populace. Mm-hmm. Well, that is true.
It's not all
right?
wrong. I was just going to say, it's not all wrong.
The people that we elect every couple of years, they're not the actual people who put it all into motion, right? It's like Congress passes a law, and then this, whole group of alphabet soup agencies start, and these regulators and people, they just start writing thousands of pages of code, federal code and regulations about how this law is going to get enacted across all these different parts of the economy and the country and all that. It's like, there's just a lot of people they're that's an unelected bureaucracy that is unaccountable, right? And so theoretically, you could say, well, there's probably smart, competent, and evil people in that bureaucracy, and so it's like there. And in the Q, from the Q viewpoint, they would say those people who are in the government, the deep state. In some sense, their description of them actually reminds me of the kind of mid-20th century obsession with the kind of Übermenschen, like this idea, like these deeply competent and powerful people who just, whose life's mission it is to, like, they're just on a different level, like we can't really stop them, like type people. So you got these deep state actors who are powerful and evil and competent and have the power to actually stymie the Trump and his administration. So whenever something doesn't come true, and any failure that Trump has, it's all just, well, that's the deep state's fault.
Okay,
right? So it's like that someone powerful stymied what he was going to do.
I see. So if the deep state hadn't got involved, basically, or hadn't overcome what was going to happen, then Hillary would have been arrested at the end of October of 17.
That's
okay.
So you really can't ever nail things down and
yes.
call them to task for anything, because it's like, well, that's the deep state, It's like, don't you see what we're up against?
Yes. And here, Andrew, you're highlighting something. For instance, when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, some QAnon supporting Christians originally thought it was a cover for the Trump administration's secret plan to arrest deep state agents. COVID-19?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
But then
the movement changed narratives and began to argue that it was either a bioweapon created by the Chinese or that the virus was spread by 5G, cellular communications technology. Here's what I'll say on that. The second half sounds a little bit more believable than the first half. The first half sounds a little bit outrageous,
mm-hmm.
that well, if Trump's doing that as a cover, that means they put it together themselves. Andrew, it doesn't make a ton of sense.
Right.
Andrew, can you scroll back up a little bit? Is there any more? I'm just curious what happens after November 1 as far as Q drops. Are you at it right there?
Yeah. This was the first one that we didn't get to was this one.
That one, yeah. November 1.
This was, I don't see a date stamp on this one, but it is the same guy responsible. It's Q Clearance Patriot. He wrote this long thing about even an atheist knows and must be intelligent enough to know that Satan worshipers are real, cults are real, and true evil exists. This information is also real. It's the job of the media and the entertainment industry to keep the public saturated with stimulus designed to keep us blind and distracted.
I don't disagree with anything he's saying so far.
So far, yeah. This is where.
By the way, is this Q saying this, or because I thought Q spoke in code though?
Yeah, earlier he did. Up here, there's this weird E.E. Cummings style writing, but then it becomes more paragraph.
But you think what you're reading right now is actual Q drop?
This is an
I thought
actual
he
Q
always
drop.
spoke in code.
No, I think that more recent maybe has been more encoded and all that.
Okay, interesting. Sorry to cut you off, Andrew.
No, you're good. That he continues by saying, they don't want to believe that there are people in this world buying children to rape and kill them as sacrifices. It's tough to stomach, but who are we if we let this continue? And who are we if we choose to turn a blind eye? Evil exists, and it exists at the highest level of the United States government. Don't be naive and think it can't happen here.
I mean, he seems
because
reasonable
I assure
here.
you that it is. Yeah. The level of importance of this operation equates to a good versus evil battle that transcends politics. This is a global evil that attempted to take over America. Many in our government actively worship Satan, Moloch, and participate pedophilia, spirit cooking, etc. Most of Americans are afraid to look this truth in the eye, but true evil does exist regardless of your religious views. This is not a joke and most definitely not a game. Thousands of pedophiles and child traffickers have been arrested since Trump was sworn in. They are all under heavy investigation, including their funds and their affiliations.
What's interesting about that Q drop, I guess, or those two paragraphs, is that's all very reasonable. There's not much there I disagree with.
Right.
There is corruption. There is good versus evil. There is pedophilia going on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it sort of ran off the rails at some point.
Well, you have to, I think, look at what's the solution that's being proposed to all of this. It's like, what is he saying about? It's like, yeah, so we know there's pedophiles in the world. We know that all those things are true. You know, Q's idea is, well, Trump's the Messiah who's going to save us from this in some sense. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's, as far as I'm concerned, where it goes off the rails.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to Q. He's doing these drops. The initial thing didn't come true. What else did he get into then? Is there some more things that he predicted or that surround Q? I mean, there's quite a lot, right?
As you go along, various theories emerge and new and current events kind of get blended in, you know, to the narrative in some sense. But there is one event from early on that I want to pull in and discuss a little bit, and that's Pizzagate, which you're probably familiar with. Young man from North Carolina became a Q believer. When I think this was John Podesta's emails that they got access to, they were released as in the run up to the election, I think. But anyway, in the emails there was talk of ordering pizza from this pizza place in Washington D.C., Georgetown maybe. Called Comet Pizza. It's a place where you can play ping pong, maybe some video games, etc., and eat pizza. And it's, by all accounts, a really well-loved place that people go and enjoy being. This idea took off that there was a basement under Comet Pizza where this elite cabal of sex abusers and Satanists held imprisoned children and abused them there. And so they even had this whole thing in the emails of when, you know, I think when they ordered like pizza, it was a boy and pasta was a girl or something like that. Like they had it all kind of mapped out and these hidden meanings, you know, that's what this all means. They created this narrative around this Comet Pizza place and the basement under it and the kids in there and all that. So there's a young man from North Carolina, church-going family guy, got armed and drove up there with an AR-15 and some handguns and to save these children. He rolls into Comet Pizza, you know, and there's not a basement, right? And so he ends up shooting a couple rounds into the utility closet door, trying to find the basement, you know, and of course all the petrified patrons ran out into the street and the police came in and, you know, he said, well, I guess, you know, my intel on this wasn't 100%, I guess. And it's like, well, now he's in jail for a couple of years and his family's life has been wrecked because of this. But, you know, Pizzagate. So it has really real world consequences, you know, these kinds of conspiracy theories that people latch onto do have real consequences for people. Somebody actually showed up in a pizza parlor with an AR-15 and started shooting. Like, that's probably something we want to avoid.
Yeah, for sure. And he was not necessarily a bad guy, right? He was misguided.
Just misguided, yeah.
So he wasn't there to shoot people up. He
No,
was
he
there
was
to
there to
save the
rescue
children.
kids. Absolutely.
So when he realized there's no basement and there's no kids, he just gave himself up,
Yeah,
right?
he
I remember that. Yeah. So in a situation like that, he's getting information from somewhere. Like, he has to load up your ARs and handguns and drive up to DC and go into a pizza restaurant. You have to have quite a level of certainty. I mean, you've got some information now. I mean, you've been reading up on this. You've heard this from multiple sources. I mean, this is not something where you read a few things and heard some rumors and decided to go take a stab at it. You plan this out.
Yeah.
Like, you got your information, you got your data, you created your plan, you figured out when you were going to go there. And I guess you had a noble purpose. You know, and part of that I kind of respect.
Well, think about it. There's a kind of righteousness that comes into play too, because it swirls together with their faith, right? It's like,
Exactly.
It's like, okay, like, God must want me to do this. And it's like, well, you've got other people around you who think like you do, and who, you alluded to it earlier, people who you find credible in other ways are into this Q thing. And so it's like you're surrounded by people you thought were credible people, and they're all saying the same thing. It seems to fit with my apocalyptic worldview. It seems to map with the way that I understand the world, my value system. And so it's like, there must be kids under
Everything
there.
checks out.
Everything checks out.
Yeah, wow. So that was a big one. And was Pizzagate, it was tied in with Q or no?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it was part of the information.
Andrew, was Pizzagate 2017 or
December 4th, 2016.
2016? I was going to say, I think it was a little before, like
Okay.
In that timeline, apparently the Q drop prophecies weren't out yet for another year.
Mm-mm.
At that point. It
Almost
was
an entire year before.
I thought there was a little gap there.
Okay, so Pizzagate was not a Q thing necessarily.
It kind of got tied. I mean, the same rumors that drove Pizzagate became kind of part of the founding assumption under the Q belief system. So there's some really, it's all mixed together under there. But Q as a figure and as a voice hadn't emerged at that point yet.
Okay.
According to Wikipedia, it says here, in March 2016, the personal email account of John Podesta, who we heard referenced earlier, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, was hacked in a spear phishing attack. WikiLeaks published his emails in November of 2016. Proponents of the Pizzagate conspiracy theory falsely claimed the emails contained coded messages that connected several high-ranking Democratic Party officials and U.S. restaurants with an alleged human trafficking and child sex ring. One of the establishments allegedly involved was the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington, D.C.
Now, just real quick though, this John Podesta guy, I don't know that we're defending this guy's character. Can you see what you can find on John Podesta? I feel like he either had I don't want to just spout things off because, well, probably won't be on his Wikipedia page, but Google John Podesta's ties to sex trafficking.
You're going to get a bunch of Q stuff.
Pizzagate was the first one that came up. And then
okay,
Pizzagate.
John Podesta's ready to talk about Pizzagate. What is Pizzagate?
Then there's something here about falsehoods seeking to tie Kamala Harris to it.
Okay. All right. Well, I could be wrong here. I was thinking that John Podesta had an assistant or something that was arrested for some of this stuff, because I want to be careful here. I mean, we're not necessarily saying that definitively some of these people aren't into sex trafficking, correct?
I'm not saying that.
That's not what we're saying.
No, I think that, the likelihood of someone who has managed to rise to the top of the dominance hierarchies, the way that dominance hierarchies work, whether in business or in politics, is that generally speaking, people who rise to the top of them aren't psychopaths. Now, because psychopaths get found out, and then, they might do well in a given context and rise to the top of that dominance hierarchy, but at some point they're found out as a psychopath, and then people don't want to cooperate with them. See, for success to happen, you have to have equal amounts of cooperation and competition, right? So psychopaths don't really do that well across any length of time. And so the idea that you'd have psychopathic evil people who rise to the top of dominance hierarchies, like that happens with enough regularity to give us the stories about it and to help us fear that. But the truth of the matter is, like, if you look at the kinds of people that tend to rise up through dominance hierarchies, is like they're not usually psychopaths. Like, they're usually people who have learned how to play that game, meaning they've learned how to cooperate and compete fairly in the context they're in, and have risen to this level of, so it's tempting. And I understand the temptation to assume that if someone's in a powerful position that they got there through some evil thing that they've done or whatever. Yeah. But all that to say that, do I think that generally speaking, the people at the top of these various organizations are day-to-day involved with sex trafficking? No, I don't think that. I think there's probably a few examples, like the Jeffrey Epstein, people who've been affiliated with him and known to hang with him. Like, clearly that happens at some level, but I don't think that that's likely across, the top. Look at the top 0.1% of the power structure in the country.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we found the first place that we disagree.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think that here's what my understanding is. The Q viewpoint on this is that pedophilia and child sex slavery trafficking is rampant in the Democratic Party. And it's not so much rampant on the Republican side. That's my understanding, because the stuff I hear from Q is more about the Democrats and all of that. It seems a little overdone, maybe. It seems maybe less than believable that like all this bad stuff happens to happen on the Democratic side and none of it's happening, or not nearly as rampant on the Republican side. So I don't know that I'm kind of buying into like the Democratic Party at the top level is all about child trafficking. Like, that's probably not the case. I certainly hope not. What you're saying, though, about psychopaths don't rise to the top because they get found out, and the society has a way of vetting people, and the crazies are sort of vetted out, and they might have power for a certain period of time, but then they're found out and they come back down. I think that might be accurate if that particular psychopathic behavior is murdering people or raping people. But I'm halfway through a book right now called The Psychopath Test, which you would love it, and you need to read it. And it is super hard to put down. And it is actually saying that there is an inordinate amount of psychopaths at the top in government and in business. And so there's 20, I'm only halfway through the book, but there's like 20 traits that a guy came up with to sort of identify psychopaths. And, it's a lot of them, it's like no empathy, very self-centered behavior, win at all costs, no remorse. There's actually a part of the brain that's going on. The amygdala is different with psychopaths. And one way that he saw this was, let's say I'm a psychopath and you're not, and we're both hooked up to an electrical cords, and we're going to get a pretty good shock. And this shock, this was a hard test they did. And this shock was hard enough that it's not legal anymore. So this is a good shock.
Pretty good shock.
Yeah, and he counts down. And for you, he counts down from 10, you're starting to get excited, down to 5, 3, and you start to tense up, and you're like, you might be starting to like sweat and like be uncomfortable, and bang, you shock, and of course you react, The psychopaths literally just sit there until they get shocked. And when they get shocked, they're going to react, of course, because it hurts, and they're human, and so they're going to react. But their brain doesn't anticipate the pain. And then afterwards, if they do it like shock number 2, same thing. Shock number 2, you're getting bent all out of shape because that hurt, and it's going to happen again.
It's going to hurt.
They just sit there and bang, they take the shock again. Like there's very short-term memory. There's basically no remorse, those types of things. So, I'm not, again, I think it depends what type of psychopath we're talking, but in the medical term of psychopath, at least according to that book, who does have a very reputable author, there is actually an inordinate amount of psychopaths, and that is more the second half of the book. I think that he's going to get into showing in corporate America, I guess, or in large corporations and in government, how that kind of plays out. The first half of the book is more about psychopaths that wind up in prison. So I guess we'll see. But
I should specify that I think that the kind of dominance hierarchy matters. If it's purely a power hierarchy, then psychopaths win every time, basically, because they're unafraid to exercise power without any concern for what that might look like to other people, right? So it's like, yes, but not very many of the hierarchies that we interact with on a day-to-day basis are power. They're usually based on something like cooperation and competence and competition, and like, a person's competence and ability to get the job done and being reliable and all that. Like, all of that is much more indicative of rising up those kinds of dominance hierarchies than someone who just relies on power, right? So I would say,
you don't think dominance helps in political hierarchy?
I think if you have a hierarchy that psychopaths are rising to the top of, that makes the whole hierarchy suspect in my mind.
And I think you've just properly defined our political system.
Yeah, it's fair.
I mean, either what some of the stuff you read in every single TV show or every movie about politics is wrong, or it's run by greed and power.
Okay, so then let's just broaden the conversation a little bit and say, let's say I give you that, and actually it's not hard for me to do because I'm a libertarian. I'm extremely suspect of state power to any end. But let's just say that we're now talking about the dominance hierarchies across, industry, academia, media, and politics. You're saying that you suspect that mostly people rise up there because of their psychopathic tendencies.
I think that's probably an overgeneralization, but I think when you look at what it takes, this comes back to what we talked about at the beginning. Like, we're down to Trump and Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that in a country of, what do we have, 330 million, 360 million people in this country, that a 77-year-old Biden and a 74-year-old Trump are our options to run the country. Now, I understand that's federal and every state, has its people and so forth. But doesn't it come back to isn't an indication there the fact that really great, high character, very highly competent people, they don't want to do that. They don't want to do the job.
Yeah,
it's just a hard job. And furthermore, then you have people that are also highly competent, highly moral, great integrity, character, so forth, that they never get anywhere close to that possibility, because to get close, it seems to me, you have to be willing to do some things that might cut against your character and integrity and so forth.
Totally.
Would you disagree with that?
I see that in politics for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we're agreed on the politics thing. And then I think it depends on when it comes to the other businesses, I think it depends on, I see a difference between running a big news organization, because I think a lot of the power dynamics come into play there. And then I see it being different for the founder of Airbnb, for example. Fantastic company. Or Uber. I don't think you got to be the founder of Facebook because you were a power guy, or Airbnb because you were a power guy. I think you're freaking smart at that point and you're competent and you can put people around you and have your brilliant idea, So I think it's different though in industries.
If you look at just, human nature, and you kind of extrapolate from some of the animal behavior studies that we've done, like if you look at, for example, chimps and their dominance hierarchies, and every animal, every group of animals or whatever, they have their own dominance hierarchies and all that. Like it's not something that's particular to humans. But a chimp that's like just a tyrant, like the guy at the top, if he's a tyrant and he doesn't, in their play, for example, allow the weaker ones to win occasionally, they'll just stop playing, and then later they'll gang up with someone else, and when he's having a bad day, and they'll pull him apart, literally limb from limb. So that tends to happen in organizations where it's like there's a built-in understanding in our human nature that it's like in order for us all to go forward, there's a certain amount of cooperation and competition that has to be allowed for, or else, well, we all have to agree to play this game. And it's like, and so, yeah, psychopaths can get to the top occasionally, but to me, it's a sign that if that's happening repeatedly, you've got a bad game. There's a bad,
I agree with that. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But
okay, so go ahead.
Well, I forget where we were circling back to.
We were talking about John Podesto and how it's maybe unlikely that he is, say, a psychopath or power dominant.
I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it either. But there is, though, people around the Clintons that have been arrested for pedophilia. Correct?
The Clintons are a sketchy group of people.
Yes.
Let's not, it's like they've been sketchy for a long time, and there's a lot of questionable stuff that's going on in their orbit. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Bill has been on the guy that, quote unquote, committed suicide.
Jeffrey
Epstein. Clinton's been on his jet 26 times, right? Bill himself. That's fishy as crap.
Totally.
Right? I mean, so coming back then to some of the Q stuff, so the whole thing may be a little bit misdirected, but there's some truth there is
that's
some
what
potential.
That's why it's so compelling is there's enough truth there. It's like, well, of course we know that there are evil people in power. There are people, that there are Jeffrey Epsteins in the world, Fortunately, not a lot, but there are enough to cause some real suffering that hurts real people,
Yep. Yeah. Anything else you want to talk through on Q, what it's about, some of the prophecies and so forth?
I'm more concerned about the way that I see it play out today. I mean, if it's just another conspiracy theory, like I can see why conspiracy theories are tempting to believe, right? Because there are times when the government goes and does something that's just evil, right?
Yeah.
Like, the Gulf of Tonkin, to get people excited about the Vietnam War, or, the George Bush, and the weapons of mass destruction to create a pretext to go into Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein. It's like, well, that's evil. Like to just make up stuff, to create a pretext to go do something. Like you could argue that that's evil, and it looks like that to me. And so it's like, well, because that kind of thing happens, that must mean that it happens all the time, everywhere, and that everybody in government is going to do that and all that. Now, I would argue, in my mind, it's actually kind of evidence to the contrary, the fact that we know now that, that weapons of mass destruction was a drummed up pretext, and that there never were any, and that we went into Iraq under, a lie, basically. So it's like, well, we've since then we've gone and we've looked and we've figured out that, oh, that wasn't true. Like that was a lie. Now, were people ever really held accountable for that? Not that I know of. So I would say there are enough, there's enough evidence of bad things happening that it's really tempting to believe that the way to fix that is, like, well, you have to have this outsider, messianic figure come in and either arrest or execute the perpetrators and then save us from this great evil. And there's a couple, like, why I care about this now and how I think it impacts us today is I think that people who, I think it's infiltrating Christianity, and it's growing within Christian circles, and these ideas about Q and the messianic nature of Donald Trump and all of that, like those ideas are presented alongside the gospel in some churches and certainly in people's minds, and I would say they have a lion's share of mind share in some circles. I had an interesting experience the other week. We visited a church. I don't like wearing masks, so we haven't been back to our church, which requires masks. So we've been visiting some churches that don't require masks and all that.
You're gaining some points right now, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
For the few people that are, for the Q people that are out there listening to this, like
Yeah.
just crawling in their skin, just being like, oh, if I could just tell Patrick and Kent, like they have us totally wrong, like they're totally missing
Yeah.
it. Here's what happened. And so they might not be loving the podcast so far, but
Yeah, so
the mask thing.
The mask
now
thing,
you're,
I got a little
now
credibility.
you got some credibility. Yeah, the point for Patrick.
Well, I think I'm not a big fan, but and like I said earlier, I'm suspect of government involvement across almost every area you could talk about. So, visiting a church, and of course, because they didn't require masks, there was, I would say, the right end of the political spectrum was represented there. And in churches where you have masks, you probably find either a balance or I would say people on the left end of the spectrum. And we can talk on another podcast about why the left-right thing in church isn't all that helpful, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. But in that message, sitting in that kind of more right-wing church, I heard a message that very carefully and kind of artfully layered on like these the very real affront to, let's call it the traditional Western Christian lifestyle. There's certain affronts that are coming to I'll call it abortion, gay marriage, and you name the cultural issues that have come against a kind of traditional view of the family and of God and the evangelical worldview, if you will. So it's like tying in the various affronts to that view with this kind of view that, well, we're the government and this cabal that's running the world has it out for us, like they're the enemy, and not explicitly saying that Trump is the solution to this, but conflating the whole, like, when you're feeling triggered because one of your cultural norms is being upended, conflating that with spiritual warfare and being, kind of setting up the kingdom of God as something that can be gaslit. It's like, no, that's the kingdom. You don't gaslight the kingdom. Yeah, gaslighting is a thing, and I know that people who watch Fox News and are QAnon, supporters feel that assault coming at them where, like they're made to think that maybe they're the crazy ones, to the fact that they value, a childhood free of, sexual immorality and traditional marriage. And it's like, we're somehow the crazy ones, right? And I get that. I come from a conservative background, and I get how it can feel like we're the crazy ones? It's like, that's that kind of gaslit feeling that you get. But conflating that with, the kingdom of God is being gaslit by this cabal of Satan worshipers. It's like, no, that's the kingdom of God is within us. Mm-hmm. And it's a kingdom of love. And it's a kingdom, it's not something that can be gaslit. It's not something that can be confronted, really, or even threatened. Okay. Right? The kingdom of God is in its advance is not threatened by any kind of cabal in any way. It's like, God is love, right? And if God is greater than, like, the greatest thing that we can imagine, greater than the universe, greater than all of this, and you have evil, however you want to conceptualize evil, where there's this kind of barking hyena coming at God the lion, well, that's not it at all, because a hyena could land a scratch on a lion. But like, God is more than the universe. He's not just some lion, right? And but Satan's still this little barking hyena, like the accuser, accusing and all that. It's like, well, the kingdom of love is so much more powerful than what we even can conceive of. The energetic presence of love is more powerful. The creative power of love is more powerful. I think a lot of times people get lost in this kind of cheap sentimentality when they think about love. It's like, oh, well, I love pizza. I love that motorcycle out there, whatever. It's like, okay, cool. I'm talking about an energetic, creative force that is descriptive of the divine creator in some sense, and shows, is one aspect of the divine creator, and he is bigger than the universe and isn't threatened in any way by this little cabal you're talking about.
Yes.
And so let's just back away from the fear, just back away from that and go, okay, just breathe.
Yeah.
The kingdom of God is a kingdom of love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And love advances and has already overcome evil. Love wins in the end, after all, right? We know the story. And so it's like to conflate the kingdom and to drag it down into the muck, to conflate it with this partisan back and forth and act like our political foes are foes of the kingdom, and that we're, it's like, that ain't good.
Yes.
That's not leading anywhere good for the people of God.
Yes. I sort of feel like that's the crux of this entire conversation. Like, we're talking about Q and everything, but I think what you're touching on there, that's the that's the pivot point here.
Yeah.
That's what we must see.
That's why I care about this.
That's okay. That's why you care about this. And that's also what we were talking about at the beginning with, I guess, conflating or getting confused between, this, in a lot of ways, this great country that we have here in the United States of America and the kingdom of God. They're very different things. Am I correct? Like
totally.
That's exactly what
Right.
we're saying. Can you explain? So it sort of clicked for me when you were talking about, this confusion of the kingdom of God and kind of what we have here in America, like the good things, because some of the things you were listing out, like they do tend to be a more right-wing political view. And so now we're sort of taking sides, like we have the right-wing political party or the more right-wing view in this country, which is sort of the kingdom of God, which means that anyone on the left was certainly not the kingdom of God. And now you have a very physical us versus them, very tangible sides to take. And now you're putting up those same sandbags again and getting ready to go. Very polarizing. You're just saying the kingdom of God can't be attached to the right-wing political party in this country.
Mm-mm.
And if it comes across in any sermon or conversation where you're on at a political level, you're kind of taking that kingdom of God and pulling it and internalizing it and boxing it in on right-wing political views is a very, very bad, awful, sort of unacceptable. You're doing violence to the kingdom
You're
at an
doing
unacceptable
violence to the
level, and it's
kingdom.
not even true. You can't do that. You're
Right.
trying. You can't do that. Is that fair?
Yes.
And then can you explain gaslighting?
Yeah, so you might want to pull up the official definition, Andrew, but this idea that it's like you're made to feel like you're the crazy one in some sense for being you. It's like, so
Okay.
what's the... So
Manipulate
To
someone by
manipulate someone.
psychological means into questioning their own sanity. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which a person or a group covertly sows seeds of doubt in a targeted individual or group, making them question their own memory, perception, or judgment, often evoking in them cognitive dissonance and other changes, including low self-esteem. Oh, wow.
it happens a lot in abusive marriages, or abusive relationships. You see an abuser kind of
Gaslighting.
make their victim feel like they've lost their sanity in some sense. It's like
Yeah.
questioning their own recollection of what happened and all that.
I see. So maybe that sermon, it would have been better to say, instead of saying gaslighting the kingdom of God, gaslighting our American conservative values or something, and then you would have less of a disagreement. But to try to make it the kingdom of God thing, you're just saying you can't gaslight the kingdom of God.
I'm saying the kingdom of God isn't the right wing
Yeah.
evangelical
Yep.
church.
Yep. Andrew, can you pull up, if you just Google QAnon, The Intercept, because there was an article in The Intercept, I don't know, I can't remember if it was got by Glenn Greenwald. Yeah, that one. How QAnon conspiracy theory spread in my Colorado hometown, where Andrew knows
great.
about Colorado hometown. So it's well, then there's this other thing of Save the Children, which I guess is interesting too. That really kind of went big. There's something in here where it's talking about. Okay, scroll down. There's somewhere here it talks about kind of who this. Keep scrolling down. It got popular with. A few of my friends. Keep going.
Right here.
Okay, found. During the last 6 months, QAnon has really, as a movement, found a lot of success breaking out of its confines among sort of the far right fringe. You're now seeing mommy bloggers, health and wellness influencers, MMA fighters, various celebrities embracing parts of the whole of QAnon. Keep going down. I think at some point here he basically says it is pretty popular among moms. There it is. She agreed that the theories have captured moms especially, adding that most people have been bored and cooped up at home during the pandemic. And it all kind of popped up. And then scroll down a little bit more, Andrew. The books, Call Me for the Song. Okay. Well, I thought it touched a little bit more about who it's spreading among, who Q is popular with. Now, did you find a graph, Andrew, on what, like Republican versus Democrat and who knew more about Q?
Here it is on the screen. About 3 in 10 Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, 28%, say they've heard or read a little or a lot about QAnon, compared with 18% of Republicans and those who lean toward the GOP. So almost 10% more of the Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents know something about QAnon, while the Republicans and GOP leaners do not.
That's fascinating. It's almost like
interesting.
The awareness of it, and I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that they're the party that's not in power, like they're kind of, and it doesn't say that they're adherents to it. It just says they're aware of it.
They're aware of it.
Yeah.
They're aware of it. Yeah.
I would guess that the adherents are substantially like GOP or right wing for sure.
I think, yeah, for sure. Now, okay, let's talk a little bit about at some point also Wayfair got brought in. Was that ever refuted?
Yeah, well, I mean, so there was just, again, on 8chan or 8kun, I think is where this originated, this idea that Wayfair was selling overpriced cabinets as a front for, basically selling children for
using
sex.
Children's names to name the cabinets, right?
Yeah, the cabinet names happen to be the names of someone who's been reported missing at some point. And so, yeah. And I mean, that was so far-fetched, like, as to be laughable now. But when it came up, it was, there was a lot of people actually took it seriously for a little bit, which...
Well, more than a little bit, right? I mean, isn't there still some people that would...
Oh, I'm sure there's still people who believe that that's what was going on. But,
okay.
I mean, it doesn't take you don't have to dig very deep to understand, kind of technically speaking, what happened there and how that kind of... there's plausible explanations for everything.
Yeah.
And to insist that the only explanation for a $28,000 utility cabinet is that there was a child being trafficked, like, it just doesn't meet the standards of rational thought in my mind.
It doesn't pass the sniff test really, but also a lot of those children some of those children that were missing were discovered. They weren't actually missing. And then also there was a whole bunch of cabinets named after various names that weren't missing. You know what I mean?
I think around that time, I sense that this child trafficking thing became the kind of cause du jour. Just anytime there was any kind of, like, anything that was amiss, it had something to do with child trafficking. And so I was doing some digging on the numbers, and it's hard to even talk about this because one child trafficked is one too many.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? There's no minimizing the suffering that happens here. But I think if you just took a guess at, like, how many people are, taken into sex slavery, for example, or any kind of slavery every year, thankfully, it's a lot less than you might think. Like, now you might say, well, they don't all get reported, and that might be, but, one of the things that one of the ideas that they spread was under, I think, New York City and some of these other cities, there was subterranean tunnels full of children waiting to be trafficked and waiting to be sexually assaulted, and then having their blood extracted from them at the height of their sexual excitement, and that blood, then the platelets being used as a therapeutic product for the elite, to stay young looking and all of that. So, the frothy blood of these abused children somehow is going to, take away the bags under your eyes, I guess. So this whole thing is like, there's at large scale, like tens of thousands of children in the streets under New York City. It's like during the pandemic when the Navy ships came into the harbor, the official line was that it was there for additional hospital beds, which again seems plausible to me in light of a respiratory pandemic. But the Q people, is like, oh, well, just wait, just any day, these tunnels are going to get emptied, and these kids are actually the boats came into the harbor to pick up the kids who are coming out of the tunnels and rescue them, and that was all being directed by Trump to save the children. And so it's like, but to believe a story like that, you have to believe that there's tens of thousands of missing children in tunnels under major cities. Thankfully, there's just no evidence that amount of children are missing or enslaved, and certainly no evidence of them being, subterranean tunnels full of them. So, I mean, obviously that we're all thankful that that's not the case, but it is interesting how, when you've got a certain viewpoint, any headline that you see just can be, brought right into that narrative.
Yes.
The Navy ships are sailing into the harbor, hospital ships are
to save all the children.
Clearly that's to save the children. Well, never mind the fact that it's there, for a pandemic to put people in, to create extra hospital beds. Like, oh, well, that's just not possible.
Yes.
It's like, really? It's just it seems silly in some ways, but it's not silly. I mean, it's a real problem. But
well, I'll give you one even a step beyond that. So, Trump got COVID-19, but that was actually just a cover for him to get out of DC for a little bit and go out on a battleship and try the Clintons.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that was a cover to make all that happen. So it's like there again, I mean, our president can't even get COVID-19, which is which is a lot of people are getting. It's a pandemic. Thankfully, it's not as bad as we thought it was in February, which is great. But tons of people are getting sick, and lots of people are dying. Let's not pass over that. So our president gets it because a lot of people are getting it, and even then, that's not what happened. There's this whole other thing. That's the thing that I worry. I guess that's what concerns me is this alternate reality that's now going on. There's an very alternate reality where you just kind of fit what is happening into this alternate reality. And then when it doesn't come true, when it doesn't shake out, then you just move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And it does seem prevalent in Christian circles. I also saw a stat, I think, from the Dispatch or something. I feel like David French had shared something on this, where it is more common in circles that are not college educated. And apparently, according to the Intercept article there, it's a little bit more common, or has become more common with moms.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I guess gets a little concerning for me is I don't really have issue with thoughts on there being sex slavery happening in America, and it's too common. We need to do something about it. I don't have issue with there being corruption in government. We should do something about it. I don't even have issue with there's people on the left that are corrupt, and we need to do something about it. Although I think there's also people on the right that the same could be said about. I don't really have issue with any of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even really have issue if you want to call your issues with all of these things. If you want to call it Q, that's totally fine. But I mean, I have seen firsthand multiple accounts where it starts there and it gets everyone's supposed to do their research, right? So everyone's supposed to do your research. This is very, very common. You can't talk to a Q person without them saying, do your research.
Yep.
You're going to hear that 3 or 4 times in the course of the conversation.
Do your
So do your research. Well, when everyone starts to
Do
do
your own
research,
research.
do your own research. You know what that takes, Patrick? That takes a lot of time. It takes a crap ton of time. Hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of time. And you're going to use Google, but then you also need to do Duck or whatever, or DuckDuckGo, and you have to do all these different things, and you have to watch multiple hour-and-a-half documentaries and things like that. So, I mean, I'm libertarian a little bit like you, so I mean, I guess people can sort of use their time as they want. It just, when you start to put that amount of time into this, then what happens is you sort of get into this echo chamber of, I feel like some of these people are starting to dip into a little bit of an alternate reality. And no offense to the people that are listening to this and believe some of this stuff, but that's when you start to think John F. Kennedy is not dead. He's coming back 21, 22 years later. Somehow he knew that America would be in this shape in 2020, that Trump would be president. He would be running for re-election. I mean, think about this. If Trump to be president at all, that could have happened in 2012. It could have happened in 2020 for the first time. How would JFK Jr. know that in 2020 Trump would not only be president, running for the president, but he'd be on a second term?
Right.
That's insane. That's absurd. Okay. Now, I can't necessarily speak to whether the guy's actually dead or not, although he crashed his plane into the ocean. They found 3 bodies, and they identified all 3 bodies.
Right.
That's a fact. Okay. So, but JFK is not actually dead. Kayla McEnany, is that the Trump's press secretary?
Oh yeah, McEnany.
Kayla McEnany is actually not her. It's actually someone else. So that's not a real, like, it's a real person, but it's not her. Like it's a fake person. Kaylee McEnany, who's apparently wicked sharp, by the way. I mean, she seems to be doing a killer job for the most part. The Earth is not round; it's flat. Michelle Obama is actually a man. She's not a lady. And because Obama called her Michael a couple of times by accident, and she has dimples when she smiles that match some other man's dimples when he smiled, and there was something about an elbow. I mean, dude, come on. What is going on?
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the going back to the mid 80s or so, when 88 Reasons Why Jesus was coming back in 1988. And was that Jack Van Imp? I'm not sure, but there was
I know who you mean. I don't remember the name.
That kind of thinking was really prominent in, I would say Christian circles, at least the conservative, fundamentalist Christian circles. And when things didn't happen, it's like you just fill new things in, just new things just come into the narrative, and then you just you keep changing it to fit what's happening, but you keep the narrative alive, and somehow that it gets a life of its own. And you might say, well, that's kind of harmless or whatever. It's like, no, I don't think it's harmless if you live your life in such a way that you're not everything that you could be, because you think that it's not worth being who you need to be because, Jesus is coming back tomorrow. It's all going to burn anyway. Then it's like, no, that's actually, that's not good. That's a negative. That's a bad outcome, right? If you're living your life that way. And I would say that the risk is also there for, actually, no, I mean, here's why I care about this is we're at a really important time in history where if you look back and you see, from the Age of Enlightenment, you see, science emerge, scientific thought, our ability to observe and measure physical reality and come up with all kinds of facts, and you see the transformation that brought on in the human psyche, and you see the technological power that has come about as a result of that. And you see where we are, and you think about where we need to go and where we're likely to go in light of things like Moore's Law, which, says that processing power doubles every, help me out.
Not sure, but it's
Moore's Law. It says it keeps growing. It doubles every 20.
What is Moore's Law?
MOOR. Doubles about every 2. Processing power doubles about every 2 years. So Well, you combine that with AI, you know, and all of that. It's like we're at a place in history where the future, well, we get to shape the future, right? And so the future, with all of the technological prowess and all of our enlightenment and all of that, like we can either use that to shape the world for good. We can, as God's people, as Jesus followers, we can use all of that in the service of the kingdom, or we can go further down the road of polarity, highly polarized, you know, left versus right, us versus them.
Yeah.
You know, we can go down that route. And if you want to go down that road, it's like you've got increasing amounts of tools at your disposal to make things truly hellish.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't recommend it. And so the reason I care about all of this is like, I want people to, I would love to, if more Jesus followers would wake up to the nature of the kingdom, the nature of the call of the gospel to, you know, to bring heaven to earth by living out, you know, bringing the spirit of the founder, making it manifest in your life each day through enemy love and self-sacrifice and death and rebirth. And it's like, that's a different message than is being heard today in a lot of places.
Okay, so do you think that if that is our mindset, which it should be, then we wouldn't get so caught up in when something pops out about Wayfair where we just jump all over it and spend 10 hours researching Wayfair? Do you feel like that has a practical implication at that level?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, you know, the real things that we could be doing to make the world better, the real, and there are people doing amazing work rescuing children from sex slavery, and there are people doing work trying to eliminate corruption from government, you know, not doing a very good job of it maybe, but it's like there are important things to do, but we're not going to be busy doing them if we think that the answer to all of that is found in the reelection of Donald Trump exclusively, right? Things like prison reform, or things like the cleaning up the deep state, the bureaucracy. It's like, if you became president tomorrow and you had every tool at your disposal, where would you start cleaning out the deep state? Yeah. It's incredibly complicated. The amount of competing value systems and, you know, commitments and all of that are present at that level of government. Like, if you shut this program down, these people are going to squawk, and then you got to it's like, it's a web that's endlessly complex. And to know what to value from that and what to act on first, and to have the clarity to go act on it and remove the people who are actually doing the bad things and really clean up the organization all the way down to the core, and have the values that it ought to have made, you know, drive them deep down into the organization. That takes real leadership, real commitment, real selflessness, real servant leadership, real love. And it doesn't happen when you're obsessed about Q.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well said.
And that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that about that. I think the one thing that we can all agree on is what you touched on earlier, which is that one child taken advantage of, certainly in terms of trafficking and sex slavery, it's absolutely unacceptable.
Totally.
It's totally unacceptable. And the society can have a big impact on that. You touched on the demand, which I totally agree with. I don't think we can make that the main strategy, the only strategy, but it certainly needs to be part of it. I mean, that would fix it, right? I mean, if the demand goes in, then of course, but there's sin involved, so that demand is not going to go away anytime soon. My understanding is watching for like abnormal behavior is a very good thing to be going about. There was I think a stewardess saw a girl on a plane and just something seemed a little off and reported it. And when they landed, there were the cops and got them, and she was saved, you know, because she noticed that. I don't know if this is a thing, but I feel like truck stops are places where bad things go down sometimes. I'm always like paying extra careful attention at truck stops and stuff.
I'm
And
a part of End Slavery Tennessee, a local nonprofit here that helps rescue women and children out of human trafficking and for them to get their lives back. Yes, truck stops are a big place.
Really?
Mhm.
What else? What else are you watching for?
Well, there's
Public transportation?
cities with heavy tourism. So Nashville, especially, is one. Sometimes there's signs that you can see, especially in hospitality industry. My past job was at a hotel, and I actually trained the sales team and the hospitality their own hospitality team on what to look for, because a lot of Johns, as we call them, a lot of Johns use hotels as rendezvous points. In fact, Interstate 24 between Atlanta and Nashville is the worst highway in the world when it comes to trafficking children. Just in the sheer number that go up and down that highway every year.
I-24 between Nashville and Atlanta is the worst stretch in the country for trafficking?
Mm-hmm. Atlanta is one of the gateway cities from other countries into the United States, and
Houston is too, I think.
And Houston is too. And it's not just big cities; it's just as common in rural areas too. And in the rural areas, it's more familial trafficking, and you don't want to know some of the details of that. But on the surface, sometimes parents will traffic their kids to pay for drugs.
Yeah.
Jeez, that's
And
awful.
and I think another reason why I think Q, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I think one of the reasons why, well, sure, you might say it's been good that it's brought the attention and the shown a light on it. I'll go for that. But I think where it becomes unhelpful then is, well, it's the evil Satanists at the top of these various organizations that are
Right.
Sexually abusing and trafficking kids. Well, it's unfortunately more complex than that, and it's us, it's people like us, it's our parents and uncles and brothers and
Yes.
sons, in some sense that get involved on the fringes, and who knows, like, if some John picks up a prostitute at the Super 8, and she's an underage Lithuanian or whatever, it's like, well, that's sex trafficking, right?
Yes.
And it's not, Hillary Clinton. It's
Exactly. It's way more decentralized than that.
Yeah, and it's like it takes our eye off of the ball in some sense,
that's true.
and
Yeah.
it makes us. It also makes us feel. It kind of assuages our anxieties in some sense. Well, I'm doing something about this because I'm researching this and I care about it and I'm being vocal about it. And it's like, okay, and like, is your next door neighbor, is their daughter the kind of daughter that is, going to end up going to work in a strip club and then a massage parlor and then get into, a trafficking situation? It's like, get involved now, like get involved in their lives, help, it's like, that's more impactful than going down the internet rabbit hole.
Yeah. And, if you live close to a major city that has some jujitsu and you have girls, that's not a bad layer of protection. The boys are in jiu-jitsu in Green Hills area. It's a place called Artista, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And a young guy and his girlfriend, Felix Garcia, and his girlfriend, Val, run it. Really cool people. I think we're going to be able to get them on the podcast. They're just
nice.
really they just look like great people, and I don't even know them that well yet. But one of the things that surprised me was on the Tuesday and Thursday classes, they're a little bigger than the Saturday class, and it's probably about 30% girls. And they are like, I would say per capita or per average, like they're more aggressive than the boys. Yeah, these girls are not messing around. Like Lincoln has yet to beat any girl in there.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's been at it for, I don't know, 2 months, a month and a half.
Jiu-jitsu is badass.
Yeah.
It's for real.
Yeah, it is for real. And what's great about it is you don't have to be big and strong to succeed. Felix is probably my height and weight, maybe even a little bit less. I don't know, heavy, but he's a black belt, which means he can beat anyone in. He can beat any. He's the only black belt there. So that's where I think it's great for a girl to get into it. I don't know that we're going to get our girls into it or not. I mean, we may, but what's great about jiu-jitsu is you don't have to be big and strong to beat someone. It's just about knowing the technique and the moves, and you actually use like kinesthetics and the body movement and their weight against themselves. And next thing you know, you've choked him out or broken a few bones, and you're getting away just fine. I just feel like that's not a bad level of protection, with as weird as some of the stuff is getting, to have even something like that for your girls. But I understand that this is a boys thing too. I mean, it's awful. It's boys and girls that are getting sucked into this. It's crazy.
Yeah. Andrew, you're involved in this. Do you know what the numbers, like the trends? Because overall violent crime has been trending down for many years, and murders and all the, it's just, there's a lot of those types of violent crimes have been on a serious decline for, for 50 years or more. Do you know, is trafficking going the other way, or do we know?
Trafficking is going the other way, at least stateside it is. In the United States, we have, of the people who are trafficked, I think it's a $32 billion a year industry as it stands today.
Does that include like porn and all that?
Mm-hmm. It includes porn victims. 83% of the victims are U.S. citizens. They're not from Lithuania or Brazil or insert country name here. The average age is 15 when they enter that industry. For boys, it's 12. It actually goes
Average
down.
age.
The average
age is 12
So,
for boys.
Yeah. And for 12 for boys, 15 for girls. Their average lifespan from the point of entering that industry is 7 years. So they may live 7 more years when they get in.
It's also important to be specific about like what the risk looks like there, because I think it's easy to think that, somebody in a white van is going to pull up on the sidewalk and take the girls.
Yeah.
And that happens like a single-digit percentage of all victims would be stranger taking them by surprise. Like, fortunately, that's just vanishingly small.
70% of it starts on the internet.
Yeah.
Most of the traffickers are monitoring social media stuff for runaways. And when the runaways, if they post something online of something like, I hate my parents, I'm running away, something like that, they will have made contact between that post and the next 24 hours.
Ooh, wow.
Wild.
So in short, you got to know your enemy.
Yeah, that's my point with that, is like, don't worry so much about the, obviously you need to be smart, but it's like, it's probably not going to be an ice cream van rolling up, just pulling up and getting the kids.
Yes. Well, that's interesting how major crime is on the decrease. Now, there was a spike in certain cities like Chicago. Their murders were way up this year. It's insane. But thankfully, major crime is down. Like New York City is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
Like New York City is way better in 2020 than it was in 1982, or the 80s. But what's interesting about the trafficking thing is if 70% of it does start on the internet, that maybe is one of the reasons why it's going down when other major crimes maybe are not.
Why it's going up.
Why it's going up. Yeah. Because now we have the internet and you have social media and you have all of these other things that it gives you kind of inroads to the vulnerable.
I think that sounds right to me.
Yeah. Changing subjects a little bit, but I heard Ben Shapiro say just a couple of days ago that in defense of Donald Trump, he is the only president since Ben Shapiro has been alive that did not start a new war.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I'll give him that.
That's crazy to think. Mm-hmm. I mean, he must have been born, in the early 80s? I mean, I was born in 84. He's older than me, right?
I would think so.
When was he born?
Well, I'm 76. He's probably my age.
36.
Oh, he was born in 1984. Yeah, he's 36 years old. So that's a good thing. I mean, Trump did a lot of good things.
I agree. And honestly, for everything I've said about, Trump, it's like he should probably get the Nobel Peace Prize. In fact, if Barack Obama gets the Nobel Peace Prize and Donald Trump doesn't, the Nobel Committee should just disband themselves.
Really?
There's no rationale for keeping it around. I mean, Obama, you look at the amount of, the warfare that he conducted and the drone campaigns in the Middle East and all that. He got a Nobel Peace Prize. If he gets one and Trump doesn't, just scrap the whole, just bin the whole thing.
Wow.
And I'm not a Trump guy, but
yeah. Did Obama get a Nobel Peace Prize?
He did.
Yep.
Do we just give all the presidents peace prizes, or?
Mm-mm. Jimmy Carter didn't even get one. Yeah, Jimmy Carter did. Did he? I don't know. I know he's been a candidate. I don't know if.
There was one stat.
Yeah, he did.
Check this out. Obama tried.
2002.
Who got?
Carter.
Carter got a Peace Prize in 2002?
Quote, for his decades of untiring effort to find peaceful solutions to international conflicts.
And then Obama also got one.
Mm-hmm.
And then not other presidents.
I don't know who all. I don't know how many presidents have gotten.
Obama, to your point, Obama tried more reporters under the Espionage Act than all prior administrations combined.
Yeah, and that's including Woodrow Wilson's, which was like Woodrow Wilson was just.
Do you understand how big a deal it is to try a reporter, the free press under the Espionage Act?
Yeah, and
that's a big stinking deal.
And we should be concerned about Trump's, kind of disdain for the role of, journalism. It's easy to understand why he might be suspect of it, but nonetheless, his attitude about it doesn't seem to be great. But, I mean, we need a free and independent press. So, but yeah, the left has traditionally, I would say, progressives have been much worse on the issue of free speech than the right has been.
Absolutely.
Much worse.
Yes, much worse. I mean, my goodness. I've mentioned it before on this podcast, but No Safe Spaces is a documentary. Have you seen that?
No, but I'd love to see it.
Are you familiar with like what was going on in Evergreen? Is that the college in Washington where another Epstein was at? Now was it Epstein? No Safe Spaces. Who was the professor at Evergreen, Andrew? I wonder if California, Berkeley, maybe was there. Evergreen University or something. Brett Weinstein. Yeah, Brett Weinstein. Where Brett Weinstein was a professor. And I mean, when you watch a documentary like that, it's hard to stick up for the far left, super progressive. It's basically mob rule. I mean, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. We should get together on the podcast sometime and talk about specifically the impulses that are represented there on the left. It's pretty fascinating. You look at 20th century history and Marxism in general, because we're seeing a resurgence in Marxism as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. The political arm of Black Lives Matter has some really Marxist ideas that are part and parcel of it, right? So that'd be something that, it's something I'm concerned about. But
let me ask you this about Black Lives Matter. I was hearing Mark Cuban talk with Megyn Kelly on her new podcast the other day about BLM logo on the NBA court for maybe it was the finals or something. I didn't watch any of it. And she was giving him she was positing to him that basically the NBA ratings are way down because of their political involvement and everything, and some of the players speaking out and the team owners and some of those things. And he was arguing back that basically all TV ratings are down, which I think he has a fair point on that. And I also see what she's saying too, because I think it's maybe there's a lot of people that don't want it in their face every day, all day long. They just want to watch a basketball game or they just want to watch a football game. But he had an interesting he had an interesting take on BLM that quite honestly was surprising to me, and I think it's part of the reason why I'm having a hard time nailing down some specifics on BLM and the good, the bad, and the ugly. If the ugly exists, or if even the good exists. You know what I mean? His point to Megyn was they have on their court BLM, and it is for Black Lives Matter, capital letters, because I've also heard like people are against Black Lives Matter capital letters, and they're all for Black Lives Matter lowercase. You know what I mean? Like,
okay.
I haven't met anyone that came out and say they disagree that Black Lives Matter. You
Right,
know what I mean?
Right.
But I have seen, particularly on social media, some people that I would, I guess, probably agree a lot with that have some vehement disagreements with Black Lives Matter capital letters as an organization. I'm curious to know more what those reasons are, and I haven't found a lot of concrete things yet. And I think it's because partly what Cuban was saying, which is they're Black Lives Matter capital letters, but not blacklivesmatter.com. So what's on the NBA court was not in support of blacklivesmatter.com. And he was even saying the two founders of blacklivesmatter.com basically believe things that neither he nor the NBA believe.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like there's these three different versions of BLM. You have blacklivesmatter.com. You have Black Lives Matter as a movement, which I think he was also saying. Now, is he saying they were for the movement but against the .com?
Probably.
I think that's sort of what he was saying. It was more confused than I thought it would be coming from Mark Cuban.
Interesting.
So what?
Well, that's a whole other podcast episode, but I think, there's probably more than three different, like, kind of distinctions. I would say there's probably a lot more than that. And I think it's a long overdue conversation that we're having about racial equity. And I think it's one that's really difficult to have because of the, lack of, like, there's a very narrow band of acceptable speech around it, culturally acceptable speech. And so it becomes difficult to talk our way through it. It's important that we do, and I'd love to do that sometime, because I think some of the same, like, it's an important conversation to have. We need to talk about the ways in which our society is not equitable, and that there isn't this kind of level playing field across the board for people of different races. And we can even talk about how much we focus on race versus other, ways to class people, right? We could talk about all that, but one of the stats that is telling about, you might look at America, and I look at America and think that outside of the government, I would say tremendous progress. Like, we've had a black even in government, we've had a black president. We have, black leaders of companies. Now, you might argue that they don't have maybe the dominance hierarchy there has racist elements to it. It probably does, but it's been remarkably reduced, and so let's cheer that progress and look for ways and root out any kind of racism and, hatred that we find in any of those, in our own hearts, in our own families, and in the structures that we inhabit as a community, in our communities and all of that. So yes, that's a long overdue conversation. We need to have the conversation. We're in an environment where it's very tough to have the conversation because there's really only one, like, there's the kind of, one of the consequences of the left's assault on free speech is that there's consequences for saying, certain things. And so a conversation requires two or more parties talking, and if there's only one acceptable viewpoint, you're not going to have a conversation. So I'm a little worried about that for the stability of our, communities. We have to be able to have the conversations, right? And to do that, you have to have the freedom to do it. And so I think it is interesting to watch people in a place of influence try to navigate that whole thing of going, there are, we have to have the conversation. There are parts of our society that are still bent in some way that can be made better, and we should work to make them better. There's so many narratives that just go unchallenged, that are accepted as true, and, that's a whole other, like Sam Harris does a great job of breaking that down specifically about police violence and stuff like that, which I don't have time to talk about. But it's an important conversation. It's a really challenging conversation because there appears to be only really one viewpoint that's acceptable without getting shouted down and labeled and canceled. And then, there's also elements of the Black Lives Matter political arm that are truly Marxist, right? And well, you only have to go back and look at the 20th century to look at the body count of Marxism as an idea. It's easy to point to at least 100 million graves, and lay it at the feet of Marx as a way of thinking, right? And so we should also, in addition to doing the work on racial equity and having those tough conversations and going through our society and looking for opportunities to make that better, we also need to be able to be free to talk about, ways to make our societies better by rooting out corrupt, I would say, in my opinion, technically satanic ideas that Marx espoused, right? And so I think we need to look and have that conversation, but it's almost impossible right now in the current moment that we're in to decouple that and have the conversation about Marxism and the conversation about racism without the two just going like, it's a really difficult time we're in.
I do agree with that. I also feel like we're trending in the right direction to have some of those discussions. I feel like, spring and summer, it was impossible. And we'll wrap it up for you. Let's get you out of here. But I feel like there's some level of rationality that is starting to creep back in. Maybe that wasn't quite here in June and July.
You think that's going to come about more as a result of us being on the other side of the election soon?
Yeah, that's probably that may be the case. Probably. I mean, I think in general things will simmer down. All right, we'll get you out of here. You're out of time. Anything else on Q, or did we cover it for now?
Well, yeah, my comment that I would just invite people who are worried about Q and fearful about Q, or fearful about the things that Q has brought their attention to. Let me say it that way. If you're fearful, I want to invite you to look to Jesus. I want to invite you to actually allow the kingdom of love to flood out that fear and replace it with the fruit of the Spirit, which is, peace, love, joy, etc. So it's like, I'm not judging and saying that one person is or is not experiencing that peace. I would say, if you look at yourself and you say, I have some anxiety, I have some fear. Okay, that's okay. Like, just, you can confess that, and you can you can allow your mind to be healed and transformed in the love of Jesus, right? And so I would say, let's focus there and find ways that we can start at home and make our communities more loving, more equitable, more honest, more, all of that. And in doing so, we'll be the kind of people and we'll raise the kind of kids who will hold their leaders to account and who will vote for the kind of people in the future who are a reflection of that kind of mindset rather than what we have right now, which is a reflection of the current mindset. Yeah. So we solve these problems. We start internally, right? And so, like, I get it. Q is very compelling. It's very tempting to try to explain all the problems of the world through a single lens and have a single point of resolution to that tension you're feeling. And that's the simple re-election of Donald Trump, so that he can do his job to fight evil and eliminate these, people. It's like, I can see why that's a tempting view, and it falls short.
So do your research. Just do a little bit more of it on the kingdom of God and what the Bible has to say about that.
I'd love to invite people to do that.
Yeah. Patrick Miller, thanks for being on, man. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Let me get a picture of you real quick. Keep your headphones on.